it's called the self in a social world. So let's go ahead and get started. Whoops. I know I'll do this first. There we go. Okay. There's a subtle connection between what is happening in the world around us and what's going on in our heads. Social surroundings tend to affect self-awareness. Depending on who we are and where we are, each individual is aware of the differences between themselves and everyone else. Okay, self-interest colors social judgment. People tend not to be objective or dispassionate when they're dealing with a situation that they're involved in. Self-concern motivates social behavior. People do things for their own selves and often function to please or impress society at large. Self-awareness is a state of focused attention on the self. Self-awareness is associated with activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, and this is the anterior cingulate cortex right here. Self-awareness develops in humans at about 18 months of age. Some animals, but not many, show self-awareness. A good example would be your dog. Your dog is a pack animal. Wolves and other pack animals don't seem to have self-awareness. They only understand themselves in context with the pack. And this is one of the reasons when dogs go are released into the wild, that they tend to pack together and they hunt that way. And this is why it's so dangerous to have packs of wild dogs, even though they look like Lassie. It's so dangerous to have packs of wild dogs because they're just as wild as wolves are. William James was a psychologist, philosopher, and physician. In his Principles of Psychology in 1890, he described the development of the self. Emotional identification with an object makes it part of your self-concept. The self changes over time. So if you identified with as far as the Dene people are concerned, you identify with your tribe. If you're a member of a church, you would identify that church as yourself. That would become part of yourself. So you can identify with just about anything. You can identify with a sports team. My favorite sports team is the San Francisco Giants. They started their game a couple hours ago, and I really haven't checked to see what the score is. I hope they're doing well. George Herbert Mead was a philosopher, psychologist, and sociologist. In The Genesis of Self and Social Control in 1925, Mead wrote that the self emerges through symbolic interaction. It internalizes the view of the generalized other. So we see ourselves as part of a group, part of something, and we see ourselves as part of that group. So we see that group like if you're a member of the Mormon church, you see yourself as part of that Mormon church, as the generalized other of that Mormon church. People can be socialized in multiple cultural frameworks, moving from one place to another. As I've told you, we were military, so we moved around a lot, and wherever we were, we saw ourselves as who we were in that social context. Parents from different cultural backgrounds might create a situation where the individuals feel that they are part of these two individuals. An example is my mother was a Democrat and my father was a Republican. So we always saw ourselves as a mix. A lot of families around us, their parents were either Democrats or Republicans, and people saw us, they looked at us funny because, well, our cultural background was just a little bit different. Living in a subculture with different values than the dominant culture, if that is the case, of course, then that is part of your cultural makeup. People with multiple cultural identities engage in cultural frame switching in response to situational cues. And of course, that doesn't work with politics because politics fit in a lot of different frameworks. But if we were Jewish, for example, if my family was Jewish, then when we were around Jewish people, we would feel one way. And then when we weren't around other Jewish people, we would feel a totally different way. We would see ourselves in a different context. A famous American proverb is the squeaky wheel gets the grease. This means that the more you make yourself known, the more you stand out, the more you're unique, the more you complain, the more attention you will get. And of course, the proverb is trying to tell you that if you want people to pay attention to you, you need to either complain, stand out, or be unique. And of course, that's what this means. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. Stay squeaky, my friends. Be unique is actually what it means. However, the Japanese feel differently. A famous Japanese proverb is the nail that stands out gets pounded down. This means that if you are unique or stand out in any way, the culture will force you to conform. Be like everyone else. And that's exactly what this is telling you. And as you can see, this nail is sticking out. So he's getting pounded down. This nail seems to be really happy about that. Gender identity is the identification of the self as a male or a female. In North American cultures, women are socialized toward relational self-concepts. Men are socialized toward independent self-concepts. These self-concepts refer to emotional connectedness to others, not the role of self within the group. Age-related stages of ethnic identity formation. Ethnic identity formation is really kind of interesting. You guys can probably relate to this. Being from a minority, you might have asked yourself, when did I start feeling like I was an American Indian? And this is probably the way it worked when you were watching television and you saw little kids. The little kids always like each other. They like each other because they're all the same height, and so they don't have to interact with them as they do with adults. So they don't recognize race. They don't recognize ethnicity. Little kids just see each other as playmates. So that's the unexamined ethnic identity. It has not, the individual has not thought about their own ethnic self-concept and who they are. Even if they're told that they're white or African American or American Indian or Hispanic, it really doesn't mean anything. They don't really understand what it means yet. They haven't seen differences, because when they see other kids, all they see is somebody to play with. It may internalize negative stereotypes, of course. When they hear something, they'll repeat it, as strange as that may seem. So they may internalize the negative stereotypes that they hear, on the street or whatever. They still haven't adhered to who they are yet. As they get older, of course, they start searching for their own ethnic identity. They explore ethnicity through cultural events, reading, etc. They may reject anything dealing with dominant culture. The ethnic identity search usually happens sometime in school, usually right around after they leave elementary school. This is when the ethnic identity might begin. And of course, the last is achieved ethnic identity. They appreciate their ethnic heritage. They internalize beneficial values while separating self from damaging aspects of group identity. And there are stereotypes out there. There are negative stereotypes out there. Stereotypes about a negative stereotype about African Americans might be that they are all thugs. A negative stereotype about American Indians might be that they're all drunks. A negative stereotype about white people might be that they are all greedy. And of course, they try not to identify with the damaging images or the stereotypes that are out there dealing with their group. They identify with the positive aspects of their group, but not and try to reject the negative aspects. Strategic self-presentation is the process of presenting the self in particular ways to shape others' impressions. It requires, of course, self-regulation. Failure in self-presentation leads to embarrassment. It can become automatic with practice that you identify as something positive as your group as something positive. Ingratiation or flattery is commonly used to gain acceptance in groups. Some people demand this. Some leaders demand that you flatter them in order to become part of the group. Modesty increases likability, but not perceived competence. If you're modest, remember we're in the United States where the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So the more you brag, the greater the probability that you will succeed. Self-promotion used when competence is highly valued, of course, and that is the bragging that I was talking about before. Exemplification, show your integrity and moral worthiness. Intimidation used for coercion. Some people intimidate people. This is one of the things that happened during the 2016 campaign. It looked like other candidates were going to get the Republican nomination, but through intimidation, Trump was able to get rid of all of his rivals, and then he won the elections. Kind of. He won the Electoral College. He lost the general election by about 3 million votes, but he won the Electoral College. Self-handicapping involves placing obstacles in the way of one's own performance in order to protect or enhance the self-concept. An individual's idea of who they are defines their self-concept. Schemas are mental frameworks that individuals use to organize and categorize the world. Self-schemas are the mental frameworks that we maintain when we think about ourselves. For example, if we see ourselves as athletic, then not only will this be our definition for ourselves, but it will influence what we focus on in ourselves and others. And I use this as an example because this is what I've done. I've been an athlete all my life, and even now that I'm in my 70s, I still lift weights and try to look like somebody who is athletic, which makes me an athlete. This is my self-identity. These are my self-schemas. So tomorrow is my lifting day. I'll get to go to the gym and lift. People tend to process information and remember information related to themselves more readily than any other. This is known as the self-reference effect. For most people, the most important thing to them is themselves, of course, so the self-reference effect is very important. Research done where individuals were singled out by having them wear clothing that they weren't used to showed that they felt as if everyone was watching them, and this is known as the spotlight effect. If they were out of their common garb, they felt like everybody knew they were in their common garb. A good example is the shorts I wore today. Normally I wear cargo shorts. These are not cargo shorts. They're white shorts with little bitty pineapples on them, and I felt really self-conscious when I wore them because it's not usually what I wear. So my wife was teasing me that they looked a little fruity, which is a bit of a pun. I don't know if she means I look gay. Anyway, and of course I was thinking the whole time we were out today that, gee, I wish I'd worn another pair of shorts because these are not my favorites. When I put them on this morning, I didn't think that we would be going anywhere, but now I think I'll change them before we go. We're going to go out to eat with my grandson, who's leaving for Florida tomorrow, so we'll see. I will probably change these shorts before we leave. An individual's self-schema does not only include who they are, but who and what they would like to be or fear we might become. These are our possible selves. It is this vision of who we would like to be and who we could possibly become that drives us forward or keeps us from getting a butcher knife and chopping up our in-laws because we know, of course, what will happen next. So these are our possible selves, our successful self, maybe our more unsuccessful self. I have started drinking diet drinks because I know that the that the sugar drinks are adding to my weight, and I'm feeling. It's not that I'm feeling so fat. I'm trying to reduce the size of my gut, and so every time I think about drinking a sugared pop, I used to drink Code Red ad nauseum. Don't tell Marius Begay that I've stopped drinking Code Red. I used to give him one every time he took off for home from Say Lee. But I've stopped drinking sugared pop, and now it's really carving down my gut. Well, that's so my possible self was if I stop drinking this, then I'll get skinnier, and maybe it'll be healthier for me. For the last couple of years, I've been thinking, well, I'm drinking all this sugared pop. I wonder if that could potentially lead to diabetes or pre-diabetes. Maybe I need to cut down. And of course, it tastes so good that it's kind of hard to do that. But yeah, so that's what I'm doing. So my possible self is to be diabetic and a little bit more overweight than I am now. And now I've lost, I don't know, 7 or 8 pounds since I stopped drinking the sugared pop. Anyway, possible selves. 3 aspects of self-concept: actual self, ideal self, and ought self. A discrepancy between actual self and ideal or ought leads to particular emotions. Actual ideal discrepancy leads to dejection related emotions. And of course, my actual self was about 195 pounds and still drinking that sugared stuff, probably more than I needed to. My ideal self was weighing a lot less than that, maybe 180 pounds, and defeating any possible diabetes. The actual and ought discrepancy leads to agitation-related emotions. Emotional reactions tend to be stronger when related to an important self aspect. And of course, I don't like to think of myself as portly. An individual's self-esteem is their overall self-evaluation and sense of self-worth. You don't have to jump if you don't want to. Self-esteem influences how we approach and respond to life challenges. Self-esteem is the evaluation of one's self-concept. Most people regard themselves more positively than they do their peers, the better than average effect. People with low self-esteem seem to be more adversely affected by negative life events than people with high self-esteem. I'm going to show you a video now. This is the tough lady after the tornado. It's really kind of interesting. They were trying to get her to say something or to cry. I'm not sure what they're trying to do.
What was it like when this came through?
I was holding my dog. I was sitting on the stool holding my dog. This was the game plan all through the years, to go in that little bathroom. And the electric never went off because the electric went off in the bathroom about the same time I felt the stool come up out of the floor. And I rolled around a little bit, and when it stopped, I was right there. That presto cooker is what I saw.
You were lying there in the rubble.
And I never lost consciousness, and I hollered for my little dog, and he didn't answer or didn't come, so I know he's in here somewhere. But it just, it was there and it was gone. Just no time. And then it was light, and I thought, well, I'm okay. And I had some stuff on top of me, and I started wiggling.
Are you able to comprehend yet what happened here?
I know exactly what happened here. Exactly.
This is in Oklahoma.
And
what do you think of all this? This is your neighborhood. I can't imagine.
This is life in the big city.
The dog. The dog. The dog.
Hi, puppy.
The dog.
Oh, Bouncy. Oh, Bouncy. bless your little bitty heart. Help me.
Helper, come on, you guys.
Oh, Bouncy. Oh, 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 oh. Come on, get him. Oh, 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 oh. Well, I thought God just answered one prayer to let me be okay. He answered both of them. Because this was my second prayer. Poor little thing.
There you go. You see that she cut her right above her. She had to cut it right above her elbow. They're trying to make her emotional, and of course,
You see this black
that's
box
life
right
in the
here?
big city.
Well, I'm going to show you something right now.
Yeah, let's see something right now. Anyway, yeah, that's life in the big city. That was a tornado right outside of Norman. We used to live right close to where that tornado hit in Choctaw, which is just north of Moore. That was the Moore tornado. Anyway, they're trying to get her to cry, and you know, she said, "Well, that's life in the big city." Self-enhancement and self-verification motives conflict in low self-esteem persons. It appears that the self-enhancement motive operates in response to a person's feelings, while self-verification operates in response to a person's thoughts. The two motives operate on different time courses. The affective route is quicker, but the cognitive route is more persistent. The two motives serve as checks and balances on each other. Only in cases of maladjustment does one motive strongly dominate the other. Studies suggest that the self-enhancement motive is weaker in collectivist societies than in individualist societies, so this conflict may be an artifact of individualist culture. And as we have learned in other classes, about 80% of the world is collectivistic. Only Western Europe and countries that were settled by Western Europeans, that would be Canada, Australia, the United States. Only those would be considered individualistic. The ones that were settled by Spain, not so much. But they are still individualistic, but not nearly as much as the English areas or the ones considered settled by Germans and English. There's a dark side to high self-esteem. People with high self-esteem may react with greater aggression than others when someone challenges their favorable self-assessments. And we saw this during the Trump administration. We could say that he has a high self-esteem, and when people argued with him, he got really angry, and he's seeking revenge for people who did not back him for everything that he did and everything that he said. So now he's seeking revenge. So he got a little bit upset. The stability of high self-esteem seems to determine whether threats to self-esteem lead to aggression. Unstable self-esteem may come from conflicts between explicit and implicit self-esteem. High explicit self-esteem and low implicit self-esteem are together associated with narcissism. In Greek mythology, Narcissus fell in love with his own reflection in a pool of water and was so fond of his own image that he couldn't leave, and eventually he died because he liked looking at himself so much. Today, narcissism refers to the combination of excessive self-love and a lack of empathy toward others. And of course, some pundits have diagnosed former President Donald Trump as being narcissistic. Narcissistic personality disorder is a mental illness. The top red line shows average scores for college students in the Narcissistic Personality Inventory, a common measure of narcissism. from the years 1980 to 2008. The bottom blue line shows a percentage of first-person pronouns, I, me, mine, in the lyrics of the 10 most popular songs of the year from 1980 to 2007. As you can see, there has been a steady increase in both measures over time, suggesting that narcissism may be increasing in the United States. And of course, you can't argue with that too much. Our social self is made up of the roles we play. Each aspect of our lives requires different actions and thoughts. As a parent, as a student, as an extended family member, these are all roles that we play. Also, our social identity. Each individual identifies themselves by their extended social roles. Maybe you identify as an American, and therefore you served in the United States military. You may go to a select church and you go every Sunday. Maybe you go 2 or 3 times a week. Or an ethnic group member. That is part of your social identity. Social comparisons. In order to understand where we are in the world, individuals must compare themselves to other people in the society. This not only includes abilities, but opinions as well. Success and failure, self-concept is strongly affected by whether we are successful in what we attempt. Other people's judgments, when our achievements are recognized, it builds our self-esteem. We compare ourselves to others to gain information and to provide motivation. People who make you feel good about yourself are either less competent than you or add something important to you, and of course this is social comparison, or more talented than you at something irrelevant to your self-concept. And this is known as social reflection. Depending on where and how you were raised determines your view of self. People raised in the Western culture tend to be more individualistic than people raised in Eastern cultures. People from Eastern cultures tend to be more collectivistic. As confusing as this may seem, people can be individualistic in some aspects of their lives and collectivistic in others. Mort was adamantly conservative. This basically meant that he was economically individualistic, but morally collectivist. His pencil-neck liberal neighbor was the very opposite. He was economically collectivistic, and he was morally individualistic. Self-efficacy is the sense that we are competent and effective in our lives. Research on self-efficacy and health shows that people who felt competent and effective in their lives are more persistent, less anxious, less depressed, more healthy, more academically successful. People who have self-efficacy tend to set more challenging goals, persist in the face of difficulty, predict productivity, keep calm, and seek solutions when problems arise. Striving plus persistence equals accomplishment. With accomplishment, self-confidence grows. Self-efficacy grows with hard-won achievements. One of the jobs that I've had in the past is that I used to draw blood. That was one of my medical things that I did. I was also a laboratory technician, but I was really good at drawing blood. And I can remember the process of learning to draw blood. It's not that easy. You have to have a stable hand. If you shake or you have tremors, it's really kind of hard because as you're holding on to the needle, of course, your hand's shaking. So the needle is shaking, and that's not a good thing. So you have to be stable. And you have to seat the needle. There's a bevel on the end of the needle that allows the blood to go into the needle and up into the syringe or the tube of whatever you're using. So what you have to do is you have to stick through the skin into the vein, and you have to place that bevel in the proper position so that the blood will flow into the tube, into the needle, and up into the tube, or up into the syringe, whatever you're using. Not the easiest thing in the world, and I can remember the process. I was always pretty good at it, and the reason I was pretty good was because I had a really stable hand. So I developed this self-efficacy to the extent that I could draw blood from a very small vein with a relatively tiny needle and still get a good specimen. So because I was successful over and over and over and over again, I develop self-efficacy in my blood drawing. Research dealing with the self-efficacy of older adults found that when given positive images of being older adults in the West actually did better on memory tests than those who were given negative images. In Asia, where positive images prevail, memory decline is less acute than it is in the United States. Feeling of competence is not the only factor of success. An individual must also feel that they have control over the outcome of their fate to be successful. Locus of control is the second factor in predicting success. Locus of control is the extent to which people perceive outcomes as internally controllable by their own efforts and actions, or as externally controlled by chance or outside forces. So if you think that everything that has happened to you has been controlled by somebody else, by outside forces, then you will not you'll have a difficult time developing self-efficacy, because you've always got somebody else that's messing you up. Studies with dogs back in the 70s by Seligman showed that when confronted with a persistent negative situation where the creature had no means of escape, the creature would remain paralyzed even when escape was possible. And this is the structure of the instrument that they used. They had this is an electric panel. Wait a minute, I've lost my arrow. There it is. Okay, let's get it back. Okay, this is an electric pad, and they're sending an electric shock to this dog. If they put the dog in here with no way of a means of escaping, the dog would just sit there and he would urinate on the electric pad, and of course he would just take it. Now, one of the things that they learned, if they gave the dog a means of escape, the dog would escape. But if they blocked the dog and they wouldn't allow the dog to leave, even when they opened that up, if he got used to this electric shock, instead of leaving, he would just stay right there. He would stay in the same place. And this is known as learned helplessness. They have taught this dog to feel helpless, because he would whine and cry and he would urinate on himself. And even if he had a way to escape, he wouldn't escape. And this is known as learned helplessness. And this is the instrument that they use to torture the dog. Researchers note that humans in depressed or oppressed situations often display the same attitude. They have a paralysis of will, passive resignation, and motionless apathy. And of course, this is what we see with a spouse that is being abused. They've taken it for such a long time that even if you give them a avenue of escape, they won't escape. They'll stay in their negative situation. Unfortunately, learned helplessness may come into play in real life circumstances, of course. In any institutionalized setting where there are little choice for free will, learned helplessness may be the product. If this occurs in a hospital or nursing home setting, the learned helplessness may affect the individual's health or chance for survival. Hospital patients who are trained to believe that they control stress require fewer pain relievers and sedatives and exhibit less anxiety. While having no choices is debilitating, having too many choices can be paralyzing. Research shows that people are more satisfied with choices when the number of choices are limited. And of course, this child is stunned because he has all of these choices. And I've watched my grandson in a situation like this, and he literally can't make a decision because there's just too many choices, too much good stuff. Research also shows that people are more satisfied with their choices when making a choice that is irreversible, like marriage. The possibility of change gives individuals the idea that there may be something better that they didn't try. Once upon a time in the United States, you couldn't get a divorce, almost impossible to get a divorce. So people stayed together, and they probably thought they were happier. Once they legalized divorce back in the late 60s, early 70s, marriages people weren't nearly as happy with their marriages as they were before. If you think that you are in a permanent situation, then you will make the best of your situation. And part of that is not thinking that it's a terrible thing that's happening to you. Most people maintain a self-serving bias or the tendency to perceive themselves favorably. Such ideas allows individuals to interpret negative events as someone else's fault and positive events that may have happened through chance as due completely to your own positive attributes. Failures are externally caused while successes are internally caused. So if you're perfect, then you're perfect. And if something is not perfect, then it's somebody else's fault. In one study from Canada of young married couples, researchers discovered that males felt that they did more housework than their wives gave them credit for. However, at the same time, the wives took credit for more of the housework than they actually performed. Each group participated in self-serving bias, but unfortunately this self-serving bias caused marital discord. Self-serving bias is evident in academia as well. When students do well on an exam, not only was it their hard work that allowed them to do well, but the test was a true measure of the material. When students do poorly, it is usually because of the instructor. However, instructors are just as bad. Successes are due to their ability to teach, and failure is due to a poor student, not the quality of instruction. And of course, this is a problem between students and faculty members. If you fail, I'm certainly not going to take credit for your failure. But maybe I need to change some of my ways of teaching. And of course, I would be blind to that because I think that I do everything perfectly. And of course, you think you do everything perfectly as well. And there you go. That's self-esteem anyway. Most business people see themselves as more ethical than the average business person. 90% of business managers rate themselves superior to their average peer. High school students rate themselves as more honest, persistent, original, and reliable than the average student. Most drivers consider themselves above average drivers. Most people perceive themselves as more intelligent than their average peer, better looking and much less prejudiced. Most adults believe that they support their aging parents more than do their siblings. Los Angeles residents view themselves as healthier than most of their neighbors, and most college students believe they will outlive their actuarially predicted death by about 10 years, which in my case was 59. I'm 72, so okay. No matter what statistics might say to the contrary, most people see their community, state, and region as similar to that described by Garrison Keillor of Lake Wobegon, where all the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all the children are above average. That's an amazing group of people. Strong women, good looking men, and children, all the children are above average. Most people practice some degree of unrealistic optimism, seeing the future as only holding good things. While unrealistic optimism may keep us going forward, sometimes it can get us in trouble. Many people see themselves as immune to misfortune and so do not prepare themselves for it. While everyone marries for eternity, half of all marriages in Western society end in divorce. People shun their seatbelts, they deny the effects of smoking, they don't consistently use contraceptives, they swear that they can change an undesirable partner. People who are optimistic have a positive self-efficacy, better health, and more solid well-being than a pessimist. Optimism allows us to believe that happiness continues around the corner. However, a dash of realism, what Julie Norham calls defensive pessimism, can keep people's eyes open to the possibility of negatives, such as smoking, driving while intoxicated, lack of contraception, and poor seatbelt use. And my sugared pop habit. I need to get rid of that. And I have so far. I'm doing really well. During Nixon administration, Richard Nixon would give speeches praising the silent majority. These were the conservatives in the country that backed his conservative policies as compared to the vocal minority that picketed Washington on a daily basis. This was during the Vietnam War. Nixon assumed that most people favored his ideas. This is false consensus effect, the tendency to overestimate the commonality of one's opinions and one's undesirable or unsuccessful behaviors. And the same thing happened to my wife and I in the last election. It was a primary. We voted for a young lady who did very well in the debates. So we both voted for her because she was very well spoken. She attacked the right people. She seemed like a shoo-in as far as we were concerned, but she lost 55% to 37% or something like that. So most of the Democrats in Iowa didn't agree with us. Just as people tend to assume that everyone has similar ideas to them, people also tend to overestimate their abilities to see their actions as unique. This is known as the false uniqueness effect. False consensus is an overestimation of others. False uniqueness is an underestimation of others. To practice cognitive deceit, overestimate the accuracy of our beliefs and judgments, and misremember our own past in self-enhancing ways. We practice cognitive conceit. If we cannot misremember an event, then we will probably try to justify it. The more favorably we see ourselves in a select dimension, the more likely we are to use that dimension to judge others. The more favorably we view ourselves, the more we think others perceive us us in a flattering way. If a piece of information flatters us, then we believe it and we evaluate positively both the test and any evidence suggesting that the test is valid. We bask in reflected glory of someone we are acquainted to. If linked with a negative person, we soften our view of them. A good example of this is my aunt. My aunt went through our genealogy, and she picked out all the people she liked. And those were the people she'd talk about. She wouldn't talk about the people that had mental illness. She wouldn't talk about the people that were drunks. All of those people. She just pretended that they weren't our relatives, and she focused on all of the people with any royal heritage or whatever. It's really kind of interesting. Research shows that when a person with high self-esteem faces failure, they tend to maintain their self-worth by perceiving others as failing and by exaggerating their superiority over others. While sibling rivalry is not universal, when brothers are close in age or sisters are close in age, people tend to compare them. If one is markedly more able than the other, there tends to be conflict between the brother and sister. When facing a romantic rival, an individual is more likely to feel jealousy if their rival's achievements are in the same general field of their own aspirations. Why are relationships so important to our self-esteem? Despite how individualistic we may think we are, social relationships are a gauge of social acceptance or rejection. Social acceptance is conducive to thriving and survival. Low self-esteem predicts an increased risk of depression, drug abuse, and some form of delinquency. Research shows that when faced with failure, people with high self-esteem are more likely to react with aggression. Roy Baumeister has done a great deal of work with self-esteem and finds that people with high self-esteem are more likely to be obnoxious, to interrupt, and to talk at people rather than to them. By making excuses for ourselves, it helps to protect us from depression. While depressed people may make more accurate appraisals of themselves, the negative thinking tends to mire them deeper in depression. Better to be deluded than sad. Research shows that maintaining a high self-esteem, even when there is evidence to the contrary, reduces an individual's anxiety, even in the face of continuing threats. Most university sorority members perceive those in their sorority as far less likely to be conceited and snobby than those in other sororities. 2/3 of Americans feel that their child's public school is good, while seeing the nation's public schools as unable to teach. Most executives overpredict their firm's ability to produce. Such self-serving bias can lead an individual to gamble away their paycheck, having faith in their own good fortune. Such self-serving bias will permit an individual to open a doomed business without proper background capital. Such self-serving bias possibly took the United States into Vietnam, the Soviets into Afghanistan, and even the U.S. forces into Iraq and Afghanistan as well. Self-presentation is the person that we present to others. False modesty is the facade that people may present when they feel superior to someone else. This may take the form of insulting yourself, fishing for reassurance or praise. It also may be used to keep others from becoming envious or resentful. I used to be vain and proud, but now I'm so humble. I must be a saint, at least. Sometimes people sabotage their chances for success by creating impediments that make success less likely. This self-handicapping serves to protect the individual from dealing with failure. The failure is due to their own handicap, not their lack of ability. Just as people attribute their failures on external causes, they themselves may choose to place the impediment as a form of self-protection. Examples of self-handicapping: reducing preparation for important individual athletic events, giving one's opponent an advantage, report feeling depressed, perform poorly at the beginning of a task in order not to create unreachable expectations, not try as hard as they could during a tough, ego-involving task. Impression management, self-presentation often happens without conscious effort, especially with someone new or with members of the opposite sex. We tend to put our best foot forward and attempt to make an impression on them. Self-monitoring, being attuned to the way one presents oneself in social situations and adjusting one's performance to create the desired impression. Some people are high self-monitors while others are low self-monitors. Some people will readily adjust their behavior to their circumstance and the individuals that they are around. Some social settings dictate the individual adjusts their behavior to fit the social setting. One problem with people who are high self-monitors: they may espouse one idea in one circumstance and the opposite in another. So the more self-monitors they are, the more likely that it looks like they're flip-flopping. High self-monitors are social chameleons. Self-monitoring is the tendency to use cues from other people's self-presentation in controlling our own self-presentations. High self-monitors are skilled impression managers, and this is what a chameleon actually looks like. As you can see, they can change their color from their background. And that is my grandson. Sorry, it's my grandson. He's sitting at his mother's desk. Doesn't he look like his mother? And there they are making the same face to each other. And that's the end. Okay. Oh, I turned